Let's get more on today's ruling in Jerusalem with our Middle East correspondent Eric Tlozek. And Eric, the sheer relief there from those three women is palpable. Remind us, though, of the twists and turns to get to this point.
Well, Bev, as you said, it took 6 years, but actually it's been 9 years since those sisters lodged their police complaints, and even longer since they first divulged details of the alleged abuse to therapists that they were seeing. One of them was seeing for severe anxiety and depression. So this process has actually taken much longer than a decade to get to where we are now, which is the most significant decision of the whole legal proceedings. A very complicated process that at one point in 2016 stalled entirely when a judge ruled that Malka Leifer was too unwell mentally for proceedings to continue. And it wasn't until 2 years later, after an NGO called Jewish Community Watch engaged private investigators to follow and secretly film Malka Leifer living a normal life outside her house, shopping, socialising, attending religious festivals, in contradiction to the statement she'd provided to the court that she was catatonic and suffered debilitating panic attacks. It wasn't until that point in early 2018 that Israeli authorities actually began to move again, and Israeli police suggested that Mrs. Leifer be charged with obstruction of justice. And also there's been alleged political interference at some of the highest levels of the Israeli government. Police recommended that the former health minister, deputy health minister at the time, Yaakov Litzman, who's from the same Jewish ultra-Orthodox sect as Malka Leifer, be indicted for interfering in the case, for allegedly pressuring a state psychologist to change his opinion that Malka Leifer was mentally fit to stand trial. So it's been enormously complicated, very difficult for the victims to maintain their faith and maintain the alleged victims, to maintain their faith and maintain their campaign to bring Malka Leifer back to Australia. But they say today's decision has made it all worth it.
So this, as you say, is the most significant day, but of course it doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the legal process. What happens from here?
From now, the defence team has 30 days in which to lodge an appeal. The Supreme Court to date hasn't upheld any of their applications or any of their appeals so far, but it's also rejected some of the grounds upon which they're appealing. Just last month, it rejected an appeal against that decision that found Malka Leifer was faking mental illness to avoid extradition. So the grounds upon which they can appeal are being reduced. But the defence team said today that they believe there's been undue political interference in this process, and that Israel's Prime Minister made a promise to Australia's political leadership that Malka Leifer will be extradited. So they'll also seek, after the appeal, a judicial review of the Justice Minister's decision to sign the extradition order, which he'll do after the appeal. So then there's still 2 steps that need to take place before Malka Leifer can actually be extradited. So there's 2 more hurdles for the prosecution to jump.
In terms of the community from which she comes from and Malka Leifer herself, what kind of response have we seen? Have we seen any response from her and her supporters?
She barely reacted to the decision at all. In fact, before the judge read the decision, she had to ask Malka Leifer to lift her head up from the desk so she'd hear it. And then there was barely any discernible response. You know, she is appearing via video link and she's wearing a mask, which makes it very difficult to tell what emotion she's feeling. But throughout these video link appearances this year, she's barely, she's been listless and has just kept her head largely on the desk in the women's prison from which she's been appearing. So it's hard to know. In terms of her community, she comes from the Ger Hasidic Jewish ultra-Orthodox sect, which is one of the bigger and better resourced sects, and it's clear that she's had a lot of financial backing for her legal defence, and a degree of support for including at one point a public relations campaign that was meant to pressure Israel's former Justice Minister not to sign the extradition order in the event that it was granted. So I would expect there's some disappointment. Her family didn't speak as they left the court today. She doesn't have any other major supporters who've been public about their support, but it's clear they exist and it's clear they've been helping to fund her defence.
And Eric, is there any sense of the timing of this as to when that extradition request might be agreed to?
It's going to take a few months. Today, the end of the year or the start of next year was being thrown around. It'll depend on a few things, upon the length of time the Israeli Supreme Court takes to hear the appeal, the length of time the procedural review of the Justice Minister's decision takes, and then of course she has to get permission to fly to and enter Australia under coronavirus restrictions. So it's not simple. There's quite a few things that still need to happen.
Eric, appreciate your update. Thanks so much.